Welcome back to Chop for Time. I'm sitting down here with James and Thomas, and we're going to be talking about the message from Sunday as we started a new series, People of the Resurrection, for the month of April. And yesterday, we talked about Mary Magdalene.
Well, we're actually recording this ahead of time, so I feel like I can't.
Like inside baseball kind of stuff, man. We can't be giving away our secrets.
Yeah,
because I just said yesterday.
Oh, that's true.
The video.
That's true. Well, it'll be released today.
Yes, sure.
But rather than asking what you guys were up to over the weekends, what are your plans for the weekends?
I gotta watch Jonathan's dog Mocha for a day or so. So that dog sitting.
So you can say I'm confused now. You said you got to.
I get to.
You get to.
Yeah.
Okay. See, we're throwing all kinds of off here.
So it wasn't like I have to. It was more. It is my privilege to.
Yes, I am.
Yes, that's it.
I'm
privileged. I couldn't tell. It's like I got to do it. Or
yes,
I got the opportunity to.
Yeah, I'm privileged. Jonathan asked. I accepted.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Ben, what do you got? Planned?
Well, Saturday I am either going to work at a concession stand on behalf of my wife, or I'm going to Hal's Mill and working at the workday up there, or I am going to help my daughter paint some more. That has yet to be determined for me. We've got some things that are a little bit up in the air, and the reason that we're recording this ahead of time is that I'm hoping that on Sunday, once everything is kind of concluded here at church, that I'll be able to head down to Georgia, the Georgia-South Carolina line, to fish for a little while with my father-in-law. So we are recording this after the message, but it's just the online message that was recorded yesterday. So
if there's any fires at the church next week, if you're driving by and you see any fires, Ben is not here, so
that's right.
That would be on James.
Yes.
So.
Oh well, but what's happening at Hal's Mill?
It's a work day. Yeah. So Hal's Mill is one of the camps that we support, and they have a lot of stuff. Like it's a big grounds that need maintained, and the supporting churches gather together every so often to do like maintenance on like the benches. We'll varnish them and sand them, or the climbing wall we'll paint, or different things like that. Yeah.
I've found out that when I attend one of those, the scope of work that I'm allowed to do is quite limited. For good reason.
Fair.
For good reason.
We've got a bit of a family weekend planned this weekend, so we're going to be. I think we're actually going to be with Jonathan Friday night in Lexington at that worship event, and then we're staying over for our niece's birthday on Saturday. So, birthday party.
Nice.
So yeah, it's going to be good. But yeah, so yesterday, for the listeners. Well, actually, for us as well.
Technically correct in both instances.
Yeah. So yesterday you were talking about Mary. Well, you called Mary the Magdalene.
Yes.
And made a clear distinction about who she is not, which I thought was very interesting. Because of all the presumptions about like who she is and her background and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Just kind of quickly hit those again. She wasn't a prostitute. Her last name wasn't Magdalene, and she wasn't the wife of Jesus. She wasn't the mother of Jesus' child, and she was also not the Mary of Mary and Martha. That's Mary of Bethany, which are the sisters of Lazarus. And most likely, very good likelihood that she was not the Mary or the woman who cleaned Jesus' feet with her hair.
Right.
So, that's there's a lot of
Marys.
Yeah, a lot of Marys. There's a lot of Marys and a lot of misconceptions surrounding the numerous Marys as well, because if there's just a general reading and there's not a lot of digging into the historicity of each of the Marys, then they can kind of blur.
Yeah. Well, the one that I did always assume was that Mary and Martha were the same one.
Right.
I think it's just because I mean, they're always just referred to as Mary or the other Mary, or like it's really not all that definitive. But once you learn, oh, it's Mary, who's from a place called Magdala, then she's not from Bethany.
Right.
So Mary of Bethany is clearly a different person because that's two different places.
Yes.
You can't really be that's not really quite how names work.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I thought that was really interesting because we do have all these like presumptions or pre-existing beliefs about certain things biblically that actually have no foundation biblically. And it's always kind of interesting to look back to where they came from. And you mentioned a little bit about you mentioned Dan Brown.
Yes.
And then you mentioned Pope Gregory.
Yes, that's correct.
Gregory the Great.
Yeah. Yeah. Dan Brown, fantastic fictional writer. And I can't even remember the names of the books now. But the Da Vinci Code. And then Inferno or Angels and Demons or something that he wrote, introduced. And I mean, there's a undercurrent of conspiracy theories and a belief that Jesus was married to Mary, that they had a child. So you can get lost down that rabbit hole from a historical standpoint too, that ties to the Knight Templars, the Knights Templar being the first to discover America and bring evidence of that with the hooked X here. So you can get into a rabbit hole there. Yeah. But the Pope Gregory thing, that's where the concept of her being a prostitute.
In Luke 7.
Yeah, right? Luke 7, I believe it starts with verse 36, I think is where it is. That's the account of the woman washing Jesus' feet with her hair. And in the 6th century, Pope Gregory the Great decided that he was just going to make the determination that that was indeed Mary Magdalene. So, ergo, there's the thought, I guess.
Yeah. But you did quote from Luke 8, so the following chapter.
Yes.
We have Mary Magdalene show up.
Yep.
But yeah, James, was there any areas that stood out to you?
Well, besides Gregory, I told this to Ben yesterday. I was like, as smart and as intelligent as Gregory was, that wasn't a high point for him. Like, I don't know where he got that from, because he was super intelligent, but just out of nowhere he says she's a prostitute. But I thought, just the fact when Ben was talking about how we learned from Mary a lot of different lessons, but one that stuck out to me was how she never abandoned Jesus above all the disciples, even above John, who was there at Jesus' crucifixion when all the others had abandoned. She was there throughout absolutely everything. She was glued to Jesus. And I did like that illustration you used of when you're driving and the cars get in between, you're like, oh, if one gets in between, it's not a big deal. But, if 2 or 3 get in between, then you're like, oh, it's still not that big. I can still see them. But then you said how if that's how we view our relationship with Jesus, we need to be absolutely really careful, because then we'll just start letting anything get between them and not think it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. With the Gregory thing and with the Dan Brown thing, I always find it interesting that we do just pick up things and treat them as like beliefs, that normal Christian beliefs, without ever, reading into it. I mean, one of the other big ones is like what happened when Jesus died. The belief of, did he go to hell for 3 days? Which only really came up because of one hymn that was written. Yeah. Like, I don't know, 1700s or 1800s. I can't remember which one.
Had to be one of those Wesley brothers.
Probably. No. But yeah, you just got one hymn that talks about Jesus going to hell for 3 days. And then all of a sudden that's just a common belief. Like everyone believes that growing up. Well, maybe not everybody, but most people believe that growing up, and then you read scripture and it's like, oh, today you'll be with me in paradise. I was like, wait. Which he says to the thief on the cross.
Right.
And
we all have this tendency that it's just easier for someone else to do the work for us.
Yeah.
And when somebody does a research and develops a hypothesis, easy for me to say, or any type of theology or belief system from a text, it's easier for us to look at somebody like Pope Gregory. The dude was great, so I'm just going to believe him.
Right.
Instead of trace this. And really the connecting of the chapters, from what I could find and what I read as far as the reasoning behind Pope Gregory's landing at that conclusion, was because, we see chapter 7 end with this account of this prostitute, this woman who was washing Jesus' feet, and then right at the beginning of chapter 8, we're introduced to Mary Magdalene. It talks about who Jesus delivered. So we're just going to follow this chronologically here, and it makes sense that that's who it is. And instead of us doing the research, seeking it out for ourselves, seeking God to give us inspiration and insight into His Word and into what we're reading here, it's just easier for us to say, okay, I'll accept that. And when it comes to like the works of fiction, that's just, I mean, we're still dealing. I mean, it's only a week out. I get it, but spoiler alert: Will Smith smacked someone, Chris Rock, to be honest, at the Oscars this past Sunday night, and that is still trending far more on social media than anything to do with an ongoing conflict, an ongoing war in the Ukraine, or anything that's happening in the world's landscape from a political, a environmental, a economical. It tells us something about that. So when we see these fictional works, we get far more captivated by those, and we get drawn into those because it makes for entertaining consumption.
Drama.
Yeah.
Like we all love a bit of drama. I think we've mentioned that a couple of times just over the week of like that this is bigger than the stuff going on in the Ukraine,
right?
And in the social media and all this kind of stuff, which is just kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Somebody gets slapped and lots of people are dying. Which one is more important to be talking about? Like we're dealing with, So yes, once you'd established that who she was not, you got into a few details about her character and things that we can learn from her. And James already pointed out one of them. But do you want to go over those?
Yeah, I think that really quickly, I think that we see that she followed Jesus everywhere, even when times were tough. She followed him through the accusations, through the persecutions, through the crucifixion. When we see almost all of the other disciples, almost all, at the moment of accusation, they're like, we got to go.
Right.
It's like, it's been real. This is 3 years or so. It's been really good. We'll see you. Peter just went back to fishing. Yeah. And many of them did the same thing. So, but we see that Mary stayed with him through all of those because she's present at the crucifixion. We read that in Matthew 27. We see that she was there. We see that in 20, that she's in John chapter 20, which was our primary text. We learn the lesson from her that she didn't let anything get in between her and her relationship with Jesus, even unanswered questions. And I think that that's probably the biggest deterrent for most of us, is when things aren't making sense or when there's more questions than there are answers. That's when our relationship with Jesus can tend to suffer, because doubt and fear kind of creep in there. But we see, even when everybody else was, was like, okay, was this really the guy? Because even though he told them that this was going to happen, they were still hoping for that warrior king to come physically restore Israel and sit on the throne, even though Jesus was telling them, like, hey, that's not going to happen. The prophets in the Old Testament even told you that's not how it's going to work. But we see Mary sitting at the tomb. She's there in his presence with him being dead, with all of these unanswered questions. And then I think that, the last one that we pointed out was that she magnified God. She magnified Christ instead of herself. And we pointed out 3 things in John chapter 20 that would have been really easy for her to be full of pride and have that narcissistic streak that all of us have to be fed in her life, because she was the first one at the tomb. even though that there was an epic foot race that took place. Chariots of fire playing in the background and everything, as the one whom Jesus loved outran Peter. But she was already there. She was the first to see Jesus. She was the first one that he revealed himself to. And then she was the first one to announce. Those are three things that I think that could easily go to our head and us become prideful of.
Yeah. Which are big deals in and of itself, being the first person to carry the message of the resurrection.
Yeah, right.
It's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So we have tons of stuff about her showing up throughout the Gospels, but we don't hear as much from her after that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is there much about her in Acts or anything following?
Not really.
No.
She's just not talked about.
I mean, I know you said, Ben, that her family lineage isn't even mentioned.
Yeah.
There's nothing
she's
about
mentioned
her family
12 times in the New Testament, and none of those have any type of family history attached to them.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned Magdalene too, and how you said, cause I didn't realize this for a long time, that, Mary she was rich.
Yeah.
Yeah, she had a lot of
Again,
money.
one of those kind of presuppositions that, that we kind of arrive at is
That was the word I was looking for, presupposition.
You're welcome.
I kept missing it.
I said that and I was like, is that right? I hope that's right.
Yeah.
Just say it confidently, man. Own it like you know what you're talking about. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things about a lot of biblical characters that we just make assumptions on.
Yeah. You about to say something?
No.
You took that breath in as if you were about to
so-
go, and I was thinking. Well, what areas did we end up chopping?
Yeah, there were a couple here, and they would have kind of been more rabbit trails than anything.
Okay.
I think they would have been good, and I think that they made for interesting studying, and definitely at some point, hopefully, I'll be able to preach on them. But, we see in Luke chapter 8 when we're introduced to Mary that Jesus healed her, set her free of 7 demons. And I said in my message, I don't know how many demons are too many demons, but I think if you go beyond 3, it's like none of us want
beyond 1.
I would think so, maybe 0, but so kind of I studied out Jesus's freeing of people from demonic oppression and spiritual oppression. We got the gentleman legion, that was this guy that was just demon possessed, living in caves and just crazy stuff. And then we see accounts of them throwing themselves into the water, throwing people into fires. We see all types of people being loosed. So I went down that trail of studying out Jesus's miracles of freeing people from spiritual oppression, and that ultimately just kind of had to get chopped because it's not really furthering the narrative so much of Mary. And then the other one that I kind of went through was Jesus's interaction in ministering to and valuing of women. Because that's something that the church I don't think has historically handled or taught well over the centuries now. But Jesus empowered women. I mean, it was just he was a liberator of women. I mean, because he had them following them. We found out that Mary and the ladies that were with her, they were the primary financiers of the travels of Jesus, and it was more than just the 12 disciples. The 12 guys that there was a multitude of people. There was a group of people that followed him.
Is this where the 70/72 come in?
Yeah, sending out.
Yeah, it's like this is a complete rabbit trail, but different translations have, because there's the 70 or 72 disciples, and some translations say 70 and some say 72.
If you're going with preacher count, you go 72.
Oh, okay.
Always the higher, man.
That's true. I heard someone say once that the translation doesn't really matter unless you're one of the two.
Well, there you go. Yeah, it's a good point. It's like, hey, yeah.
Anyway.
But yeah, and I think we see his interactions here with Mary, the way that she was the first to carry the gospel message, the resurrection message. She was the first one that he, she thought he was the gardener, in this, and he was like, Mary, and that voice, man, just triggered it, and it was a revelation that it was Jesus. But then we see the woman at the well. I mean, there's just so many different occasions that we can see of Jesus, fortunately for all of us, looking past not only our past, not only looking past our sin, but his love doesn't favor one gender over the other, or
Right.
one ethnicity over the other, or one socioeconomic status over the other. Jesus is just amazing.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and there's tons of we were talking about Mary and Martha recently.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a Sunday morning you'd brought up Mary and Martha?
If it was a Sunday morning, it's been a little while ago.
I can't remember. I remember we were talking about Mary and Martha, and how Martha was busy and missing the opportunity there. But even the fact that Jesus allowed Mary of Bethany to sit at his feet and learn from him as a teacher was countercultural.
Oh yeah.
You know, to even allow women to learn.
Yeah.
And actually, he encouraged her to learn. Mary Magdalene taking the gospel message first, or the woman who's getting stoned for being caught in adultery. Currently our culture is very torn on the view of the different genders, or view of gender in general. I mean, I think is a big topic at the moment. Because the Bible's very clear that two genders are different, but they are equal.
Yeah.
And we have some camps elevating one above the other, and that's just not the way it was supposed to be.
Yeah. So I chopped that because that was where I was, that's where I ultimately wound up with it. But again, it's a, limited amount of time. And really this whole series of the people of the resurrection is about learning things not only about the people that we're looking at, but more importantly, what do we learn about Christ in these accounts and in these stories, and then what's applicable to us. The question that I left with everyone was basically, when times are difficult, when there's unanswered questions, do you flee from or draw closer in your relationship with Christ? Because I think that we see many of the disciples, they had that fleeing instinct, and they left. They allowed distance to be put between them and Jesus. But with Mary Magdalene, we see her drawing closer. And I think that's a good question for us to answer.
Yeah. Pretty cool. Any other
I was just thinking when you said how Jesus treated women, I can't remember exactly the number for it, but the fact that he sent Mary to go and tell the disciples, like historically, that's wild, because in Jewish culture, the woman's testimony meant absolutely nothing. Like, it meant absolutely anything. So, like, I mean, they just think about that. It makes sense as to why when she came back and we're like, guys, I just saw Jesus, like, he's alive. And there's no wonder they were like, yeah, who cares? Yeah. Like, he's dead. We saw him. It's over. And we're probably going to die here soon, if not down the road sometime. And so, but Jesus rebukes him for that when he shows up. But still, her testimony, because of the culture of Jewish culture, like, it meant nothing. Yeah. So I think that's just wild that and I feel like Jesus did that on purpose.
Well, in verse 18 of John 20, she went and announced to the disciples, I have seen the Lord. And that's just, but just one closing thought.
Yeah.
We talked about her not having any family history or lineage tied to her in Scripture. The one descriptor of Mary Magdalene throughout her 12 mentions is that she was a follower of Jesus Christ. And there's no more powerful of a descriptor that we could possibly hope and pray that would be attached to our lives.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things whenever you grow up in the shadow of your parents or something like that, it's kind of nice once that moment when you're no longer, like, known as, that's just Mike's son. Yeah. That was my thing. Anytime I was doing anything outdoors, it's like, oh, you're Mike's son. Okay. It's like well, I'm Thomas.
Yeah. Nice to meet you. Yeah.
But yeah, just to have that is her sole descriptor is really cool. Yeah. I like it. Very cool. Yeah. Well, next week,
Thomas.
Yep. We're talking about Thomas.
Yep.
And Ben got me to talk about Thomas.
Thomas,
of course.
Speaking on Thomas.
Yeah. So yeah, we're going to get into that. Looking forward to that. So we'll see where that goes. I feel like I've forgotten something. No, cool. Well, thanks for joining us at Shop for Time. We're going to be back here next week. Ben may or may not be here. We might have to replace him, and we'll see how that goes. But James is going to be in the hot seat, so
Could be
we'll
like
look forward to that. Plenty of bloopers.
Could be like a Marvel end scene.
Oh yeah.
Credit end scene.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
It's like I show up or I don't. Who knows?
Well, we'll see you next time.